Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Elizabeth met Billy when they were in college. At first, they were just friends. Then she noticed that he had a great attraction to money. He only talked about it. Why did it always have to be about money? She wondered. I grew up in a very poor family, so I want to achieve everything on my own, so that neither I nor my children suffer from it, the guy told her then. She understood him then and wondered what she could do. And let's open a bakery near the school. The girl threw options. To do this, you need to draw up a lot of papers and other things. Harry did not believe in the idea. Then Elizabeth came up with an idea. What if we come to the local cafeteria, agree there with the saleswoman that we will bake the tastiest pies and pastries, and she sells? Straight eyes lit up. Hi, she started the next day. Hello, the young girl who was selling buns and cookies looked at her. Listen, we have a proposal for you. Elizabeth told her what she had thought up tonight. What will I get out of it? The barmaid wanted to find out right away. A percentage, Elizabeth said uncertainly and looked at Billy, who stood back and said nothing. Thus began their first business together. The money was small, but they had it all the time. The young people lived in a dormitory. They had enough for what they wanted. Billy, why don't we go for a walk? Elizabeth came into his room. He valued her as a partner, but never considered her as a girl. Well, let's talk about what new things I can do to improve sales. She approached him from the other side. Elizabeth liked the guy. She wanted to be with him, but she realized that she couldn't get him that easily. The girl realized that with her brains and his penetration, they could do a lot together. Well, come on in, he could talk about it for hours. Listen, what if in addition to sweets, bake simple pies, with cabbage, potatoes? She looked at him. And you'll have time for all that? He didn't understand when she had time for everything. Of course, it would be a cakewalk, the girl was sure. That night she didn't sleep again, because she made the dough, then made the filling. But by morning everything was ready. If you open something of your own, then call me to work. It's very good, the barmaid told them. Of course, if everything is perfect, why not? Smiled Elizabeth. She was off her feet, doing her homework in the evening and baking at night. Her roommates felt sorry for her, but the girl needed to prove to Billy that she could be a reliable partner. Elizabeth, let's go for a walk. Now Billy came to her on his own. What? She was lying on the bed, studying some synopsis. She didn't feel like going out at all, but the first time he came to her, she got up immediately. Of course, the girl was happy. Let's go then. He left her room to give Elizabeth a chance to change. She was ready in a minute. It was unusual for Billy to come himself today. They walked out of the dormitory. It was obvious that the guy was in a hurry to get somewhere. Wait, I can't keep up, she ran after him. Come on, Billy's eyes were burning. He held out his hand, and now Elizabeth could barely keep up. She didn't understand where he was going in such a hurry. Finally, Billy stopped. Look, he stood in front of a glass display case where there were cakes, pies, and other sweets. And you dragged me here for this? Even offended Elizabeth. What are you doing? Now that school is over, we will do the same, dreamily he said. But where to get so much money? Grinned the girl. You do not believe that we will succeed. He did not even turn to her. Why, I believe, but you have to start small. Elizabeth came closer. He lowered his head and walked in the opposite direction they had just come from. Where are you going? She followed him. Home. He was very sad. And me? The girl was so hurt that she had done so much for him, was always there for him. And now when she was so tired, she wanted to do her homework and go to bed. She followed him. And all he had to do was show her what a beautiful shop window it was. Why do I need a man who doesn't believe in me? He walked like that. He didn't turn around. I told you I believe. It's just, you want everything at once. She leveled with him. Billy's step was not so fast now, and she could walk quietly beside him. Why can't a man dream? The boy didn't understand it. Calm down already. Dream as much as you want, but you need to realize small things first and strive for more. She was getting nervous. What are you dreaming about? He stopped suddenly. About you? She almost bumped into him. What do you mean? He didn't expect that answer. Don't you notice it? She looked him in the eye. What exactly? He couldn't switch from one subject to another. I'm always at your side to make your dreams come true, trying, staying up nights, cooking. I come to your room all the time and you. She turned away and stopped talking. Elizabeth, I thought that was all you were interested in. You came over and hugged her from behind. Billy, she turned to him, and I thought you'd never pay attention to me again. Why did you think that? He leaned back a little to look into her face. I can't believe it. She pressed herself harder against him. Back to the dormitory they walked together. Elizabeth couldn't understand what had even happened today. She went to bed, and all she could think about was what had happened on the walk today, and she thought that Billy would never be with her. From that moment on, they began to have a new beginning. Elizabeth was no longer as tired as she had been before. She was filled with love. Now she started making not only shortcakes and pies, but also pizza. Her studies were coming to an end. She had to think of something. So, Elizabeth, we have enough for a rented apartment, but we have to do something to move forward, Billy told her. You know, let's open something, like a coffee shop, the girl suggested just a few days ago. She looked in a magazine about it. Not a bad idea, but our people are not accustomed to it. Will they go? Doubted the guy. And we'll do some promotions, offer tastings, she seemed to insist. And Billy gave in. They got their diplomas, and the apartment was rented right after that. Billy started his own sole proprietorship. He was doing well, so now he could think about a coffee shop. I called a woman. She's selling the stall, the girl told her boyfriend tonight. That's great. You went to see what they were offering. Hello, he arrived to meet the woman. Good afternoon, she stood beside an iron box that looked like nothing. At first, Billy didn't even want to consider this option. But when he found out the price, he decided that he could use this iron box too. It's a deal. Tomorrow the stall will be on our street, he said to Elizabeth at home. Who will work together? The girl asked him. I do not know. If you will cook and everything else, then I can go out to sell. He was ready for anything to earn. That would be perfect. She walked over and hugged him. It's a deal then, he kissed her. From that point on, the work boiled over. Elizabeth, even though Billy had released her from sales, couldn't stay at home. So while Billy was selling from the stall, she would take the pies and whatever else she had left and go to the organizations. Wow, where did that come from? He looked at the money that was at home when he got back. Here, decided to experiment, went to organizations. Those who do not go to lunch gladly bought pies. She did not brag. On the contrary, she said so that she was ready to continue this work. You're doing a good job, praised her lover. They went on with their lives. Things were going uphill. Both in the stall and in the organizations, everything was bought up. This could not but please the young people. Finally, they could try the coffee shop. Shall we risk it? Billy looked at her. The airbag is there. We can try it, she assured him. Then we'll start tomorrow, Billy said confidently. He'd immediately went out and bought a machine to make coffee, cups, and anything else they could use for the job. The next day, his shop offered customers not only delicious cakes, but also hot and flavored coffee. Many people didn't realize it, but when the first cups were given away for free as a bonus, people went along. Billy, I congratulate you. It's only been a few months and we're doing so well. They lay in bed in the evening. You know what I'm thinking? He looked up at the ceiling and put his arms around her. No, of course not. She lifted her head and looked at him. I think that you and I have merged into such an alliance that it's about time we formalize a relationship, he told her, and she stopped even breathing at that moment. I agree, Elizabeth said quietly, not a few seconds later. Tomorrow we will think about it, he kissed his beloved, and they fell asleep in each other's arms. In the morning, when they brought up the subject again, everyone was doing their own work. Billy had no idea that anything could go wrong as he had thought of it. But the couple's dreams were not destined to come true, because a week later the young man received a summons. What's wrong with you? Elizabeth asked him. She saw Billy standing in the middle of the room, confusion in his eyes. Here, he held out a small sheet of paper to her. How's this? Now she was puzzled too. There was nothing to do but go to the enlistment office. The boy was told when he had to report. He couldn't refuse, so he started packing. And what, you'll be taken away just like that, and what will I do here? She did not understand how she would be left without support. To continue the case, he said confidently, because he knew that the girl would cope with it. This I understand, but you cannot even imagine how tired it is. She sat down on a chair. I understand everything, but what do you suggest I do? Although he talked about everything confidently, he was uneasy in his soul. Okay, I'll do anything. She watched and realized how much she loved this man. No send-off was arranged by Billy. The two of them and Elizabeth sat in the kitchen in the evening. How many warm words they had said to each other during that time. And the next day, she was already hugging him on the platform. Right, she said quietly in his ear as he pulled her against him. Sure, kissed the girl's ear. They should have climbed into the wagon, but Elizabeth couldn't let go of his hand. I'll be back soon. He looked around one last time and took a confident step away from her. Bye. She sent him an air kiss. I love you, he answered her and made a gesture as if to catch her kisses. Billy left and Elizabeth went home. She had a lot of work to do. Every day she wrote to her lover, telling him how things were going and everything else. He would answer her, sometimes giving her advice. Wow, I've never seen letters come every day. A friend came to Billy. What's the big deal? We're in business together, so we give advice, he replied. What kind of business? The friend was interested. A coffee shop. Billy exaggerated a little. Oh, you're a tough guy? The army buddy was surprised. Well, we're just starting out, but I think it's going to go uphill, he said, to cheer himself up. This time everyone got behind him, but it didn't take long. Billy endured everything they did in the service. It wasn't easy, but he had to endure it. Listen, approached him John, who until a few days ago had been inquiring about the business. What do you want? Billy was surprised to be approached about the same thing again. I was thinking, I've got money. I can sponsor you to open something you've always dreamed of. He sat down next to the guy on the bed. But come on, I'm already with Elizabeth, and we weren't going to take anyone third. Billy went on about his business. And I'm not saying there's going to be 3 of us, the guy said cryptically. What do you mean? The young man had stopped doing something. Now he was sitting and looking at John. I suggest a mutually beneficial cooperation. You have brains and a registered IP, and I have money and connections that are already businesslike, comrade. No, I can't do that. Billy didn't want to leave Elizabeth. What are you doing? I'm offering you a business, and you're grabbing at a woman's hem. John couldn't understand him. Okay, I need to think about it, he hesitated. Come on, hopefully the choice will be made in the right direction, winked the one who wanted to be a partner. Billy lay on his bed at night, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. What if he really got together with this John guy? It was a prospect when he and Elizabeth would get to that point. He decided to write to the girl tomorrow. Elizabeth worked tirelessly. She baked, she cooked, she sold, she was torn, but she wanted to do everything so that by the time her lover arrived, they would be on the next level. The mailman came again today. A neighbor who was sitting on a bench outside the driveway told her. Billy, she ran to the box. Yes, there was a letter. The girl took it out, pressed it to her chest, but if she knew what it said. The girl read it at home. She sat on the couch, her eyes running over the lines. She couldn't believe that a loved one could write such a thing. Billy wrote that he met a friend in the army who suggested he expand his business. But unfortunately, there was no room for her there, then apologized for a long time. Told her to get all the proceeds when he got there, he'd take it and leave for a while. How could it be? The letter fell out of her hands. At first, she wanted to answer him, but soon changed her mind. Elizabeth counted how much money she had. She had enough to pay for a few months' rent because she had to live on something. Isn't the coffee shop open today? The woman who bought coffee and some dessert every day asked her. Unfortunately, no. Elizabeth lowered her eyes. She was ashamed that she had attracted so many customers, and now she had to refuse them. How could it be? The woman looked around. I'm sorry, Elizabeth waved her hands. Why should she invest her money and effort only to have it all taken away from her and sent away? She walked home, tears covering her eyes. Elizabeth tried to blink more often to make them go away. Why is such a beautiful girl sad? A young man came up to her. She didn't want to be rude to anyone, but she didn't want to talk to anyone either. Okay, you didn't want to bother her. You know, I recognize you. What? She turned around and tried to look at his face, but she didn't recognize him. Don't mention it, you don't know me, but I'm a regular customer, he was smiling. Oh, I see, she was going to move on. Wait, he held out his hand to hold her back. What else? She looked at him, her eyes were very sad. Can I walk you out? He realized that the girl was feeling bad, so he tried to just help her. Oh, do what you want. Elizabeth went. The guy followed. Can we go somewhere? I'll buy you a drink. He tried to shake her up. I don't know. Elizabeth didn't really care. Then let's go. The young man cheered up, although his mood was already good. They entered the cafe, where he ordered ice cream and juice and sat down opposite the girl. I'm Mickey. What's your name? He looked at her while she picked at the white mass with a spoon. Elizabeth, she replied. There was no intonation in her voice. Why are you so sad? He asked the girl. He felt sorry for her for some reason. I don't have to report to the first person I meet. Finally, she brought the ice cream to her lips and tasted a little. She wrinkled her nose. Not good. He thought he was a fool for not asking her what she liked. It's fine. She continued to stare at what she had in her creamer. Mickey was wooing the girl as best he could. No, he didn't want her to like him tonight or anything. He just wanted her to have a little more fun. Come on, I'll walk you home. He held out his hand to the girl. Good, she was unconcerned. They walked down the street and only Mickey was talking now. Elizabeth didn't care about that. They reached her house, the guy said goodbye, and went in his own direction. I'll come for you tomorrow, he shouted as he walked away, and Elizabeth was walking into the driveway at that moment. He didn't even know if she had heard him or not. And she was suffering, so much so that she wanted to kill herself. The loneliness was building up with such force that no tears helped. She didn't know what to do about the business. She realized that she would have to pay taxes, and the products would spoil, but still she did nothing. Hey, I could barely find the apartment. Mickey was standing outside the door when Elizabeth opened it. What are you doing here? She was a little taken aback. You promised yesterday, he smiled. I thought we'd meet somewhere else. And to be honest, the girl had forgotten all about him. I didn't want to leave you alone with your thoughts, the young man admitted. Okay. Now, she didn't want him to come to her house. She quickly packed up and went out. Today they went to the park. The weather was nice outside. Why don't you share what you had going on? Mickey asked openly. Elizabeth stared at him for a long time, unable to say anything, and suddenly, tears sprang from her eyes. He wanted to hug her, but he didn't, afraid that the girl would push her away. We worked and lived together with Billy, she began to say, and she went on and on. By this time, she was sobbing her eyes out. Calm down, it's going to be all right. Well, what money you made, he was already hugging her, not at all embarrassed. And she didn't mind it. I don't need any money. It's just a shame that we started together. I tried, I gave advice, I did things, and he did this, especially now that we're at a distance, she sobbed. You know what, forget your Billy. Let's go to my place. He stood up and pulled her with him. What guessed me like this? She imagined her crying face. Come on, I'll introduce you to your grandmother. We'll sit and drink tea. He was sure of what he was saying. They went. It was not far from the place where they were walking today. Hello, a woman came out into the corridor. She looked at the grandson and the girl with surprise. Hi, meet Elizabeth. This is Elizabeth. I can't say she is my girlfriend, but hopefully she will be soon. He blushed and looked at Elizabeth. Good afternoon, she said hello. Why are you standing here? Come to the kitchen, I'll feed you pies. The woman hurried. Elizabeth, when she heard the word pies, she felt funny. Not so long ago, she had cooked so many of them that she could feed a company of soldiers. It was indeed a quiet house, and Grandma Mickey spoke slowly and judiciously. After they sat down, the young man went to walk the girl home. I'll ask you out tomorrow, he said at the driveway. Okay, she liked him, but she couldn't forget Billy either. Mickey and Elizabeth started seeing each other every day. A few months passed. The young people were sitting at her house. They were already boyfriend and girlfriend. There was a knock on the door. Elizabeth's heart beat more frequently in her chest. Only Billy could have come here. Who's there? She went to the door. Open up, she heard a familiar voice. Elizabeth did as she was asked. The guy stood on the doorstep. He wasn't sober. Hi, she muttered and looked around the room. I just came to get mine, he mumbled. Elizabeth realized that was why he had been drinking, not to explain himself. Yes, she went and got the envelope with the money and all the papers here. And why is there so little here? During the time I spent in the army, you could have earned more. He was surprised. I stopped everything right after your letter. She didn't want to lie to him. Understandably, he looked at her. At this point, Mickey decided to show Billy that Elizabeth was not alone and had someone to stand up for her. That's it, you've had your fill. You can go on your way. He walked over to the girl. Oh, I see. So it's still unclear who dumped whom first. Billy grumbled and walked toward the stairs. Why did you go out? The girl turned to Mickey. Why, did you want to hide the fact that you weren't alone all the time? He wasn't surprised by the question. No. Elizabeth wanted to cry again, but she held back. It's okay, her boyfriend hugged her, and they went to the room. Billy began to cooperate with John. First, they opened the same stall. The young man himself invested money here. And John helped to build a small establishment where they wanted to open the same coffee shop, only adding different fast food. Who's been a bake for us? Billy asked his partner. Who did it before? He turned to him. Elizabeth, we didn't hire anyone. We were self-employed, the guy said. So we'll have to find someone. Do you have someone in mind? John thought. I don't know, Billy thought. They didn't think long. They turned to a woman they both knew, who helped them with the paperwork. She recommended a woman who used to be a cook. Look, it's working, John told Billy when they started getting good sums of money from the first days. That didn't mean anything, he was sure. At first things did go well, but then something went wrong. Turns out, Billy found out later, John had almost doubled the prices. Why'd you do that? Billy talked to him. It's going well, he wanted to make a quick buck. No, it wouldn't work that way. Billy knew that firsthand. He decided not to invest anymore because there was no money and he didn't want to take out loans, useless debts. Look, come on, I can't get a loan from the bank, John urged him. I'll get into debt, and then what? Billy didn't believe him. He was beginning to regret that he had abandoned Elizabeth and done everything his friend had told him to do. What had he fallen for? The big money, and where was it? The guy sat at home. He realized that he had done wrong, but how to fix it now? Especially since he saw that his ex-girlfriend was with someone else. John, he came to meet him. What? Talk fast. I don't have time. He was filling out some paperwork. Look, I've analyzed it. We've got a lot more expenses than income. He wanted to show him the reports. Oh, I don't have time to do that. The guy waved him away. He thought that everything would fix itself. Then we're breaking up. I don't want to work at a loss. Billy threw the papers on the table and just walked away. It's a pain, John looked after him. Now Billy was home. He was studying the paperwork so he could start all over again. The first order of business was to apologize to Elizabeth. It took a long time to collect his thoughts, but he got up and headed for the place where they had once lived. Who is it? He heard her voice. Elizabeth, it's me. He spoke loudly so she could hear him. What do you want? She opened the door. I've come to apologize, sorry fool. I was wrong, Billy said. Elizabeth, who's there? Mickey came up behind the girl. No one. She wanted to close the door. Wait, I want to talk business. Held the door open for the boy. Elizabeth turned to Mickey. She nodded, showing that she was willing to have a simple conversation. What? She was willing to listen to him. I want to offer you a business partnership. He didn't look at her. You found a partner. Why do you need me? Or was it good when I did everything and prompted you? She said with a sneer. Please, let's have an informal chat. Not here. He finally looked up. Okay. Where and when? She realized she couldn't just leave it like that. Let's do it tonight at the restaurant. He hoped she would come alone. Okay, I'll be there at 7. She headed for the door. Bye. Billy said this already through the closed door. He went back to the apartment where he lived. His mind was a mess. He realized that he had wasted his time and money, why he had listened to John. But the past cannot be returned, so the young man was determined to resume everything, hoping that Elizabeth will help him in this. Hello, he wanted to come before her, but he couldn't. The girl was already here. Oh, it's you. Didn't want to keep you waiting. She looked around. Billy sat down at the table opposite. He took the menu. He looked to see that his friend had already ordered. The waiter listened to him and left. What did you want to talk about? She sat back and waited for him to finish. I suggest we try to start again. He got right down to business. Why so? She wondered what didn't work out with the guys. I don't want to talk about it. In a word, nothing. He was ashamed to talk about it. Okay, your terms. She didn't know if she'd agree or not, but she wanted to listen. As before, you do all the paperwork and do a little bit of writing if I need it. I'll do all the rest, contracts, money. You'll draw something on paper. And then you'll leave me again and take everything we've worked for together. She's sarcastic again. We'll sign a contract, he promised her. I'll draw it up. That was her condition. No problem, in his heart he was glad Elizabeth agreed. They ate, drank tea, and went home. Back at the apartment, Billy began immediately to draw up a business plan for Elizabeth to look at and evaluate tomorrow. He finished late at night, made his bed, but sleep didn't come. The guy thought about his ex-girlfriend. He wanted it all back so badly, but he didn't know what kind of relationship Elizabeth and Mickey had. Sorry I'm late. They had arranged to meet in the morning, but Billy overslept. That's okay, she knew he could do that. Here, look at this. He wrote till all hours of the night last night. He handed the girl a folder of papers. She looked through it all, sometimes making a surprised face. Wow, it's a whole cafe, she nodded. Yes, decided to go ahead a little, tired of doing petty things. He realized that these words may seem ambitious, but he really thought so. Okay, we can try. There is no such thing in our city yet, the girl agreed. This time they decided not to buy any stalls, although they had one. And if they wanted to sell pies, muffins, and coffee. It stood in a good place. People still remembered what and how they sold there. Now the young people decided to rent a small building. Are you going to run it yourself? Billy asked. For now, yes. If the volume increases, we'll call someone else, she promised. So they started working again. Indeed, it was a novelty for the city. There had never been a single delivery before, and such an assortment of finished products. Now a person could come and snack on salads, pies, pizza, and more. How do you do it? Billy wondered. It had been months since they had worked together. The guy himself doesn't know why he thought that, but it seemed to him that Elizabeth was communicating with him again the way she used to. Can I take you out to a restaurant? He asked her once. If only to celebrate the successful start of the business, she said into his eyes. Okay, at least that way, he agreed. In the evening they sat at a table opposite each other talking. Elizabeth today was in a beautiful dress, on her head style, beautiful. Elizabeth, what a fool I was to lose a girl like you. He took her hand, saw that her cheeks were flushed. Billy, don't. She took her hand away. No, she hadn't forgotten him, but she had Mickey now. She couldn't betray him. Tell me, is there even a slim chance I'll get you back? He asked her a question he'd been thinking about and doubting for a long time. Come on, she didn't want to talk about it. Why not? He didn't understand. Do you think that if I loved you for such a long time, it could have all gone away in an instant? She lowered her eyes. I don't know, he sighed. Why are you doing all this? She really wanted to know. When he came to her and suggested they work together again, her heart beat twice as hard. I get it, he took her hand again. That's when Mickey came running into the restaurant. And I thought you had forgotten all about it and were with me now. He stood by the table and looked at the hands that were intertwined. Mickey, what are you doing here? Elizabeth felt uncomfortable. It meant he was watching her. When you said you were going to the restaurant, I suspected something wrong, so I followed you. I stood looking at you for a long time, and he turned to leave. Billy turned away at this point. He thought the man would just walk away now. But that's what Mickey was waiting for. He turned around and punched the young man sharply in the jaw. Billy didn't expect this. He grabbed the spot of the blow and stood up. The receptionist and security guard immediately approached him. You must leave our establishment, the man in the suit said. Okay, we're leaving. The girl stood up, her face flushed with shame. What are you doing here? She shouted at the guys. Wait, we're not done yet. Mickey stopped her. Stop it, she shouted. Then Billy walked over to her, took her under his arm, and they walked down the sidewalk. You'll be sorry, Mickey shouted after her, all out of sheer resentment. Where are you taking me? Elizabeth wanted to stop. Home, Billy said firmly. There was no doubt in his words. I have all my papers and things there. She meant the other apartment. It's okay. We'll go there in a few days when he calms down, the guy promised her. Okay, Elizabeth finally relaxed. She trusted this man. They had been through a lot together. They arrived at Billy's apartment late, so he suggested they have tea and then go to bed afterward. Where will I be? She saw that he had only one sofa. No way together? He smiled, realizing it was a stupid question. Billy looked Elizabeth reproachfully. Okay, sleep here. I'll make my own bed on the floor. He was still smiling. What's so funny? The girl didn't understand. He did not answer and just went into the kitchen to make tea. They didn't talk about anything else. Elizabeth didn't even drink anything. She lay down, turned her back to the wall, and fell asleep. Billy tucked her in carefully. He believed that tomorrow or in a few days they would be together again. Good morning. He made scrambled eggs and coffee, waiting for the girl in the kitchen. How long have you been making breakfast in the morning? She asked him. No, especially for you. I wanted to make you happy. He put a plate and a mug in front of her. Thank you. She stood up, then shook her head. No, they were not together, and she wanted to kiss him. Elizabeth sat all red. She knew Billy could have guessed what she wanted to do. You're welcome. He pretended he hadn't noticed, but to himself, he was glad he had. So much for work. She was ready to roll mountains. After all, the man who inspired her was there for her again. Okay, partner, that's what he said on purpose. They walked out of the house together, went to wherever they had work. Elizabeth took care of her business, and Billy did the delivery and other tasks. A week later, Billy and Elizabeth went to the apartment where she lived with Mickey. He was gone, and it was clear from the absence of his things that he had left. That's good, Billy said. What's good? I've been dumped by another young man. She walked over to him, smiling. Because you're only mine, he hugged her. Elizabeth didn't mind. She had been looking forward to this moment. And when Billy reached for her, she couldn't resist. It was their first kiss after a long time apart. Are we together? Billy asked her. Is that really what you want? She asked it for nothing. She didn't believe it would happen. Very much. He kissed her once more. Together then, she pressed herself against his chest. The young people had a fresh start. They were doing everything together now, counseling. Several cooks were hired and one saleswoman. Everything was good. Listen, Elizabeth, why don't we go somewhere? Billy asked her. Why not? She didn't mind. Billy quickly found the vouchers they needed. In a few days, they would be in a warm country, just the two of them. I'm so happy, Elizabeth told her chosen one. As I was, he was hugging her. They were at the airport. Do you think they will manage here without us? The girl wondered. We'll see, he kissed his beloved. When they were at the sea, Elizabeth asked Billy the question that worried her the most. Don't you want us to get married? She asked. I do, but let's wait a little, buy an apartment, and then we'll get married. You really wanted to, but to make everything beautiful. Okay, she agreed, but she was offended. They'd been together for so many years. Last time when she left him for Mickey, he had understood everything. Why he still had doubts. But the girl kept silent. She knew that if Billy hadn't come to that opinion himself, she couldn't push him. He would decide for himself. They had spent a fabulous week. Now they were returning to their homeland. So, how are things going here? Billy came to his cafe. Everything's fine, they told him. He checked all the accounts that had been kept in his absence. All was indeed well. People were attracted to them, so the earnings were great. 6 months later, the young man again invited Elizabeth on a trip. She was surprised, but they could afford it. There he invited her to a restaurant. She realized that he had some kind of proposal for her. Well, finally, she sat in front of the mirror in the evening and tidied herself up. Sit down, he was gallant. Thank you, Elizabeth was worried. Billy started. I'd like to propose to you that you open a second cafe. What? That's not what she was expecting. What's the big deal? Profits only grow. Why not? He looked on, not even realizing how upset he had now upset her. You could have told me that back home. She picked up the water glass and took a sip. Yes, but I wanted it to be beautiful. He still didn't understand. Okay, she only nodded. Where there's one establishment, there's two. They went back to the hotel. Elizabeth said she wasn't feeling well and went to bed. Billy didn't understand why she wasn't happy for him, but said nothing. On his return, he realized all his dreams. The second cafe, which was already almost equal to a restaurant, was open. That's it. Now we can look for a good apartment, he said to Elizabeth. She rejoiced because he told her that as soon as his own place will be, then there immediately and the wedding. Great. She immediately began to look for a suitable option for them, did not forget that they may have children, and therefore, and for them a place was needed. When everything was chosen, they drove to the deal. Elizabeth, they walked into their new place. Yes, she was looking around. Will you be my wife? She turned around. He was on one knee holding out a box to her. Billy, I've been waiting for this. She took the ring and slipped it on her finger. I love you. He stood up and hugged her. And I love you like you have no idea. The period began when it was necessary to organize everything in the apartment and to think about the wedding. But Elizabeth did not want so. Beloved, let's not hurry. Now we'll do everything in the apartment, and then we'll get married. They made only one room, in which they were now. Okay, as you say, he hugged her. Business was booming. Not 6 months later, Billy opened a third restaurant. The income wasn't what it used to be now. They could afford not only an apartment, but also a car. Where have you been? Asked Elizabeth when Billy came home late for the first time. Out for a walk. He was drunk. I'm here with the builders, and you went out. She was amazed at the change in her husband-to-be's behavior. Why, I have a right to, he hiccuped. And I don't? The girl was outraged. Come on, do not swear, he went to bed. Elizabeth did not understand what had happened, perhaps some kind of problem, but doubted it. But when it started happening every day, she decided to talk to the young man. Sit down, she asked him, but he could only lie down. He was drunk again. She hadn't interfered in her husband's affairs lately. He was doing quite well himself. Elizabeth only traveled around to see how things were going and if the workers needed anything. But now that her husband had started acting like this, she decided to check out what was going on in the establishments that both of them owned. Hello, she walked into the hall. No one was there. Good afternoon, the receptionist came out to meet her. Where are the customers? Never once, during the entire time of the restaurant, she had never seen that there was no one here. And we have problems. The girl waved her hands. What? Elizabeth wanted details. She was already walking towards the kitchen. You see, Billy came every day, took the proceeds. No one was buying. That's why we stood up, the employee told her honestly. And why did you call me? Elizabeth realized that the building was not as cheap to maintain as it might seem. I do not know. He said that he would decide everything himself, shrugged her interlocutor. So, the girl realized that there was really nothing to do here. We're closing. I understand you. The employee left her, probably went to inform others about it. Elizabeth was coming home very angry. She was going to give her husband such a hard time. Today, she went to her other cafe. There was nothing good there either. They were working on a sucker. She closed that one too. Billy. She walked into the house, but no one answered her. She realized he was gone again. Tried to call, but the phone was disconnected. So she started frantically packing. Now was not the same time as when she was without money and didn't know what to do. She made a phone call, rented an apartment, got in her car, and drove to her new address. The girl realized that Billy had to be rescued, but how to do it and why she needed all this, she didn't know. For a month she was alone, did not do anything, and did not find out. And then she got a phone call, an unfamiliar number. Hello, she sent into the phone, afraid she'd be told something bad about Billy. Hey, it was him. Where are you? She could hear that the voice was neither happy nor sober. Come over, Billy asked. Why? To see you like this? She was sad. I'm at the hospital. He dictated the address. An hour later, Elizabeth was there. Yes, she loved him, and she wanted to help in any way she could. Well, she saw a very thin man who reminded her remotely of her Billy. Again, sorry, he bowed his head, just like last time. What happened to you? She couldn't understand. As soon as business reached some kind of peak, he'd snap. I don't know, I guess money does that to me. He couldn't justify his behavior. Why are you here? She wanted to know if he'd come, or if he'd been brought. He decided to quit once and for all, he'd said about the coding. That's right, she agreed, though she didn't approve of it. While the young man was in treatment, Elizabeth decided to raise from the ashes what was still left. She bought groceries with the money she had. Little by little, but things began to recover again. Billy, as promised, had gotten codependent, and now they were together again. Finally, their long-awaited wedding had taken place. When she was a student, she'd wanted a big dress and lots of guests. Now it was enough just to get married. And I'm happy again, and she hugged him, that I have the old Billy with me. I don't know how you put up with all this and forgive me every time. He didn't understand. I don't know, I guess I just love you so much. They were walking down the street. You know, let's build a house, her husband told her. I agree, she used to dream about it. Then it's agreed, it won't be hard for you to take over the whole restaurant business, and I'll go into construction with my head. Billy asked her. Of course it would be my pleasure. Elizabeth smiled. She really was a happy woman. From that moment on, Billy devoted all of himself to their future home, and his wife did everything to make sure that their brainchild would only grow forward. She believed that her husband had reformed, and would never be the same again. Would you like to go and see it? He often asked her. Yes, she was glad. The house was just beginning to rise from the ground, but she believed everything would be all right. I want a baby so badly, my wife used to say to her husband at night. I don't know why it's not working. Why don't we get tested? Billy suggested. No, let's try it ourselves first. She didn't believe she couldn't get pregnant. 6 months passed and Elizabeth came into the bedroom with the long-awaited 2 stripes. Look what I have, she showed her husband a thin stick. Elizabeth, I love you, he kissed her. We should go to the doctor, she spoke her thoughts aloud. Sure, if you want, I can go with you, he offered her. No need, I'll do it on my own first. She was going to do it next week when she had free time. The house was built, only the interior trim remained to be done. Elizabeth was working. Billy warned her to be careful. I'll go early, she told the girls at the restaurant. She was going to see the doctor that day. Good, they waved her off. Elizabeth left the place and headed to her car when suddenly she saw her husband on the corner. He was talking to some girl. She smiled and wanted to drive over to give him a ride, but when she got in the car and started the engine and was about to start, something terrible happened. Billy and this girl started kissing. Her hands shook. She couldn't understand. Elizabeth was so worried. She wanted to jump out of the car and go over to the couple and tell them what they were doing wrong. The car door opened. Elizabeth took a step and passed out. The restaurant staff saw this and called an ambulance. Where am I? She opened her eyes. In the hospital, a man in a white coat told her, My baby. She immediately realized the worst. You lost him. The term was very small, so from a lot of stress everything happened. I had to tell the doctor. Elizabeth, are you all right? Her husband ran into the room. Stay back. He put his hands out in front of him. What happened? He didn't understand. Then the girl cried and told him everything she saw. That's why everything happened. What are you talking about? He sat down next to her. Are you saying I wouldn't recognize my husband? She couldn't speak calmly. Yes, he nodded. Don't deceive me. The girl was still crying. And I'm not trying to do that. He couldn't believe she could think that about him. After the discharge, the family was not the same as it had been before. Elizabeth was constantly jealous of Billy. She couldn't believe it wasn't him then, because she had seen it with her own eyes. Elizabeth, let's make an appointment with a counselor. Your nerves aren't right, he asked her. Your nerves are fine, she shouted back. But nevertheless, the husband and wife made an appointment with a specialist. Now they were waiting for their turn to see him. After talking and sorting out all the situations, it became easier on the soul. Elizabeth herself did not realize how she did not get to what the psychologist told them. Billy, I'm sorry, maybe it really wasn't you then. She didn't know if she'd been led to believe it or if she'd realized it herself. It's okay, he hugged her. Elizabeth was pregnant again. They had already moved into their new home. It stood in an elite settlement. Elizabeth wanted to get to know the neighbors, but didn't know how to do it. How are you feeling? Her husband was interested. He had recently started some kind of business, but he didn't tell his wife anything. Normal, a little nauseous, she admitted. Should we go to the hospital? He always asked her that question. No, I'll do it myself. She didn't want to go anywhere. You know, I didn't want to tell you, but I want to be an MP, Billy told his wife one night. What do you know about it? She couldn't figure it out. And who is sitting there? You think everybody knows everything, laughed the young man. Lately he'd started disappearing at work again. Came home when his wife was already asleep. He did not disturb. Elizabeth began to worry whether the situation that they already had once happened again. Hello, she picked up the phone. She did not understand who could call at night. Hello, she heard a woman's voice. Everything trembled inside. I'm listening to you, Elizabeth said icily. Your husband was in an accident. Now they are taking him to the hospital, that's all she said. What? Elizabeth shouted into the phone, but no one could hear her. She jumped out of bed, got dressed, and rushed to where her beloved husband was. As soon as she ran into the room, she was immediately reassured that he was fine, just a slight concussion. She began to settle to the floor. What's wrong? The nurse was frightened. She called the doctor. Emergency, stretcher, he shouted. Elizabeth had a hemorrhage and had to terminate the pregnancy in the 4th month. This is what the girl was told when she came to. Doctor, why couldn't anything have been done? She sobbed again. If we could, Do you think we would have taken such an easy way? He looked at her, realizing that she was in shock. Elizabeth spent a couple of days in the hospital, as did Billy. Then they went home. Why does this happen? She asked her husband. How? He looked at her. We have everything and can afford a lot of things, but no children, she cried. Calm down, darling. Everything will be all right, he stroked her hand. Nothing's going to be all right. She began to get hysterical. Her husband's new business was booming. He became so respectable, bought himself a new expensive car, hired a driver. To make his wife's work easier, he found an assistant. Isn't it hard for you? Billy used to ask Elizabeth all the time. Why are you bothering me with this question? It's not difficult. It's not difficult. I'm working, so it's normal. She was nervous. All right, I'm off your back, he joked back. Billy, now that enough time has passed to conceive, I want to try IVF. She decided to have a serious talk with him. Okay, you could try it. He didn't deny her anything. I'll make an appointment with the doctor then, she rejoiced. Yes, he nodded. She had read a lot about it, so she wanted to try that option as well. If it didn't work either, then it was a goner. According to the doctor's recommendation, Elizabeth needed to prepare herself, and she started to do so now. What are you drinking? Billy was curious when he saw his wife drinking some green stuff in the morning. It's vitamins, it strengthens the body, she explained. Well, maybe I should drink it too, he laughed. Try some, she handed him a glass. You, and how do you do that? He spit it all out into the sink. They both realized it might not work the first time, so they prepared for the worst. Are you ready? Asked Billy's wife as they headed to their first counseling session. More than ever, she was telling the truth. There was nothing else in the world she wanted more than a child, so she was ready for anything. On their way then, he trotted off. After that, the doctor explained to them what and how it would happen, how the fertilized egg would take root, how long it would be before the pregnancy would be known exactly. But even all this did not give 100% guarantee that there would be no miscarriage. Husband and wife were ready for everything, so they just smiled and listened attentively to what the doctor said. Come back in a week, we will make you pregnant, smiled the doctor. You like such patience. Thank you, we will, said Elizabeth, and they left the office. The doctor, I guess he will be my doctor, said the girl. Nothing to worry about then. Billy was happy then when his wife smiled. All lately his whole day had been busy. There was something he could do to carve out time to be with Elizabeth. But when it came to the children, he couldn't say no to her. I mean, he was the reason she was having miscarriages. I'm scared. They sat in the hospital corridor. It's gonna be okay, he held her hand. The doctor invited them into the office, and they went in. All the procedures were done in different labs. Now again time was needed. God, this is all taking so long to do. Elizabeth was growing more impatient each time. And don't tell me I'm on fire, he looked at his watch. So, Elizabeth, I'm going to have to keep you in the hospital because there's no telling what will happen to you. We don't want to take any risks, and here you are always under observation, the same doctor told her. Okay, I'll go along with whatever you decide, she looked at her husband. Yes, he couldn't hear what they were talking about, but he knew when a wife looked that way. She was looking for support. Afterward, Billy left for work and Elizabeth was placed in a comfortable room. She didn't say anything, lay there watching TV, looking through magazines. Why is nothing happening to me? She often asked the nursing staff. What should be happening? They didn't understand. I don't know, she didn't understand, but she wanted to ask. After 7 days, the doctor who was seeing her came to her room. And what happened? She sat up in bed. So far so good. The pregnancy is there, he smiled. He knew he had pleased her with those words. Why so far? Elizabeth widened her eyes. She waited until the scary period when she could have lost the baby had passed and packed for home. You're being reckless, the gynecologist told her. I can't stay here any longer. I'll go home for a while to see my husband and I'll be right back, Elizabeth promised. Okay, but everything is your responsibility. He couldn't believe that a woman who had wanted children for so long now wanted to risk it. Elizabeth was determined to leave, she did. The girl came home. What a hometown everything was here. And even though the hospital she was in was very good, there was no substitute for the walls of home. Billy, hey, she called her husband right away. Hey, how are you doing? I hear you hurrying. I'm home, she blurted out. What happened? He got nervous. because Elizabeth had to stay in the hospital until the end of the term. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided that I could lie at home, she told her husband honestly. Well, don't do anything there. I'll be there in the evening, he promised her. Elizabeth was not going to do anything. She went to her in her husband's room, lay down in bed there. How cozy it was. Then she decided to look at the photos. She hadn't leafed through the album for a long time. She couldn't find anything to do at home. She couldn't find anything to do. Then she decided to look at the paperwork, how things were going at the restaurants, whether Billy was keeping up with everything or not. She opened the computer, her eyes looking surprised. She finally saw what her husband was doing now. It was a lucrative business, but to have it turn around so much in a short period of time was unexpected. Hey, she didn't hear him come in. Why are you scaring me so much? Her heart was racing. She calmed herself internally as if something was wrong. Why are you doing something forbidden? He leaned over and looked over her shoulder. Yes, looking for secret correspondence with mistresses, she laughed. And what's the progress? He saw her looking at his papers. I'm surprised you were able to do that, she kissed her husband. I didn't want to tell you until it worked out so there wouldn't be any talk later, Billy admitted. Okay, I don't mind. She was happy to see her husband again. Hungry? He asked her. A little. She remembered that she hadn't eaten anything since this morning. Let's go to a restaurant, he suggested. Ours? She looked at him enigmatically. Of course, he extended his hand to her. She didn't refuse. Husband and wife got in the car, drove off. Everything was fine in their establishment. The employees were doing their jobs properly. The newly hired director was doing well too. Good evening, he hurried to the owners. Hello, Elizabeth saw him for the first time. Meet Harvey. This is Harvey. Billy introduced him to her. Nice to meet you, she nodded. They made their way to a table and were immediately seated. How nice. She looked at everything going on around them. It's all thanks to you. Billy never tired of saying that. Don't be silly, we did it together. If it weren't for your absences and departures, we would have stood firm long ago. She reminded him of the most shameful steps. Enough, I can't even think about it. He turned away. Okay. Let's not talk about the bad stuff. They continued talking about different topics. After dinner, the couple drove home. That evening, Billy put all his business aside to be at home with his beloved. They watched some movie and then went to bed. I'll be up late tonight, the husband warned his wife. Okay. Thanks for spending so much time with me yesterday, she kissed him. Billy left and Elizabeth stayed home, but she wasn't bored. You could do whatever you wanted. After that, she went to the hospital for a while. When the doctors confirmed that she was fine, Elizabeth would come home again. You're here again? Her husband would come home. Do you mind? She laughed. No, of course. He hugged her. And so the time passed almost until the very last day of her pregnancy. Elizabeth, isn't it time for you to go to the hospital? Billy asked me one day. No, there's still time. I'll go in a few days. The doctor has already called me, she told him. Good, don't take too long. Call me if there's anything wrong, he threatened her with his finger. Everything was fine, she was sure of it. It was late evening. Billy wasn't home as usual. Elizabeth was about to go to bed, but something in her stomach hurt. She stopped and waited. Nothing else happened. There was still a week and a half to go before the doctor's due date. So the girl thought nothing of it, went further into the bedroom. Oh, she woke up. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, Billy. But no one answered her. There was complete silence. Elizabeth grabbed her phone, but her husband was out of range, or maybe he had just turned the phone off. Then Elizabeth didn't wait for anything. She called a cab. Anthony worked at the hospital. He helped in the linen warehouse, unloading and unloading duvet covers, pillowcases, towels, sheets. The man liked the work, and it paid well. Anthony helped rearrange the closets. The hospital workers often called him. Now, he never said no to anyone. Often, when there was no work, he could take a broom and sweep the yard, and that's what he did this time. As he was cleaning the main alley, he saw a woman walking down it. He had a crush on her. He had a crush on a girl in high school, and this stranger reminded him of her. Hello, he said as she walked past him. Good afternoon, she nodded. After that, Anthony began to notice the stranger more often. Then he began to watch her at all. It seemed to him that she was always sad about something, and he wanted to approach her, to talk to her, to calm her down. But he didn't dare. Katie, you're having your treatments. The nurse looked out the window and shouted. Now she was looking back at her and hurrying to get inside. Anthony realized she was a patient at the maternity hospital. Surprised, there was no belly visible at all. He decided that in a few days he would definitely approach the woman. After all, if he didn't, she would be discharged and he wouldn't see her again. Anthony went about his business. He tried to ignore the fact that they started to make fun of him when they noticed him standing under the tree watching the woman, but he didn't care what they told him. "Hello," he approached her as she sat on the bench. He even thought she was crying. "Hello," she was silent. "Why are you crying?" He really saw tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, but the last thing I want to do right now is talk to someone." She didn't turn around. "My name is Anthony. Is something wrong?" He wanted to be supportive. "No, I'm fine. Just go where you're going." She didn't want to talk. "I wasn't going anywhere. I work here." He didn't want to leave. "Yeah, you're a doctor." She turned to him now. "No." He looked at the warehouse. She followed his gaze. "Why did you come to me?" She wiped her tears. "I just saw that the woman was sad. I wanted to be supportive," he admitted. "Yes." She looked at her hands and was silent. Tears again appeared in her eyes. "Tell me it will be easier," he asked her. "My husband is dead." She still didn't look in his direction. "How could that be?" Anthony was amazed. She was pregnant. "That's how it happens. Life is unpredictable." He went on a trip, working as a trucker, and in the evening I got a call that there was an accident. My husband was gone. So I got here." She stopped. "How are you now?" He looked at his stomach. "I don't know, I'll get by somehow." She was confident. "Shall we walk?" he asked her. Yes. She didn't know why she trusted some strange man either. They walked down the alley, then turned off it. "Won't they lose you?" He was worried about her. "No." She looked back at the ward windows. They had told each other so much that day that they seemed to have known each other all their lives. "When are you being discharged?" It was important for Anthony to know. He didn't want to end communication with her. A couple days later, she looked at him. "Good. So we still have time to socialize." The man rejoiced. "Yes," she smiled back. Today, Anthony walked her to the entrance of her wing and went to do his work. He was always remembering something. The smile never left his face. Some people even asked him what happened to make him so cheerful. Anthony just kept quiet in response. He didn't want to jinx the slim opportunity he had. Katie, he saw her come out for a walk. "Hello." It was obvious she was excited to see him too. "Let's take a walk." He gave her an elbow. Of course, she wasn't crying anymore today. "How would you like me to start courting you?" Anthony asked in a funny way. He had been thinking about it all night as he confessed. "Come on, I am." She lowered her eyes to her stomach. "And what? I'll raise you as my own." He was sure of that. "Well, I do not even know, and what people will say." Not had time to bury her husband, and already with another lives, she said. "And what do you care about these people?" He did not understand. No, just she did not know what to answer. Then what? Anthony did not understand. "Let me check out first, and then we'll see," she asked him. Okay, he agreed with her. From that day on, they started a serious relationship. Kathy's friends were very surprised when she went to the hospital as an inconsolable widow and came back happy and with a man. "Lucky you, Kathy," the girlfriend said. "Don't be jealous," she laughed. No, she hadn't forgotten her husband, but her life went on, and soon there would be a little one. Anthony lived in a rented apartment. Then Kathy suggested he move in with her. He did not agree at first, but subsequently moved in. The woman didn't work anywhere. "I used to be provided by my husband for baby to do something, and now pregnancy does not give. And the little one later," she told Anthony. "Nothing, as long as my salary is enough." The other day he took a part-time job at the hospital. They married before the baby was born. Kathy gave birth in the same hospital where she had been hospitalized. Since Anthony worked there, he had no problem visiting his wife. "I'm so glad I have a son," he told her. "Thank you for everything." Kathy realized that this man had saved her from suffering and everything else. They hugged each other. And afterward, Anthony was already meeting his family on the steps of the same maternity hospital. "Here you go, Daddy." A familiar nurse handed him the bundle with the baby. "Thank you." They drove home. When the little guy turned 6 months old, Anthony came home with some unpleasant news. "Katie, I need to tell you something." He looked at her. "Speak." She stood stone-faced in the hallway. "I was made redundant today. The money will keep coming for a while, but I promise you I'll get somewhere." "Anthony," she rushed over to him. You what? He wasn't expecting that. I thought you were going to tell me I'd had enough of you and your baby and leave. She was almost crying. You what, you fool? I love you so much. Where can I leave you? He hugged her and her son tightly. They went on with their lives. Indeed, for a few months Anthony received some money, but then it stopped coming. He did all sorts of things, all sorts of jobs. Either there were just odd jobs that paid pennies, or there were no jobs at all. Hello. Katie opened the door one day and there was a man standing in front of her. Good afternoon. She was waiting to hear what he had to say. I'm sorry, but your husband put a mortgage on the apartment. The payments haven't come in for months. We can't wait any longer, he said. So what, you're taking our place? She didn't understand. Unfortunately, yes, or you have to pay everything back as soon as possible, he told her. Kathy signed some papers. She had to talk to her husband. Anthony, you know what happened today? She couldn't even talk about it. He couldn't think of any way to get that kind of money. Her husband had a KMNAZ, on which he was in an accident, but there is not restorable. If only for iron, the woman was looking for different options. Well, I'll think of something. Anthony realized that you cannot stay without work. You do not need janitors? He asked on the phone. He did not care what position he would be offered, as long as he worked. No, he answered. He hung up. He dialed another number, but even there he heard a refusal. The man didn't know what to do. He took any part-time work, agreed to everything. He had to dig, load or unload, he did, but it was not enough to make even one payment. How are we going to live from now on? My wife cried. I don't know, I'll think of something, he promised her. Anthony, I'm pregnant, she looked at him. What? He was both excited and scared. Yeah, I just found out, she cried even more. Well, that's very good news, he pulled her close to him. Something really had to be done now. Then a friend told Anthony to take a cab. How could I not have thought of that? He slapped his forehead. Hello, he went into the office. What do you want? There was a man behind the desk. I need a job as a cab driver, Anthony said openly. Do you have a car? The man behind the desk asked. No, he really didn't have one, but for some reason Anthony thought he would get one. I'm sorry, then there's no vacancy for you, he said. Too bad, he came out of there sad. So, the same friend asked in the evening. As you can see, zero, I need a car, sighed Anthony. Yes, business, and try to go to the big store. There is a parking lot nearby, which always requires security guards. Again gave the idea comrade. Okay, so he did. Anthony didn't miss any opportunity to earn money. Yes, you're a good fit for us, the man heard for the first time in a long time. Kathy, I got a job. He came home happy. I congratulate you, she was sad, probably just very tired. I'm getting out tomorrow. He started rummaging through his closet to find a suit to wear to work. Okay, his wife went to her room. Are you sick? He followed her. I'm already tired of thinking about where to get money. She didn't rebuke him, just spoke her thoughts out loud. Don't worry, I know we'll be fine soon, he hugged and kissed her. And I believe you, she smiled back. Anthony went out to work. There was nothing complicated here. Just open the barrier, get money, and give a ticket in return. That's what he did. It worked out well. Can I keep it for a couple days? He often heard that. Sure, what a problem. Your money is my security, laughed Anthony in response. All right, chirped a little more client. It was the so-called tips. Anthony rejoiced. Something to help. He saw the driver couldn't start the engine. No, thanks, I'll do it myself. Then Anthony backed off so there wouldn't be any complaints about him harassing people. Katie, I want to tell you, people are so helpful. No one's ever been rude. Not once did anyone say we were taking money or anything like that. No, everyone was polite. Anthony loved working here. Not only was he making money, but the income was good. The bosses praised him for his work, and he did his best. So work hard. His wife had been a bit cheerful lately. She no longer whined that it was difficult for her with a belly and a child. It seemed that life was getting better. But the bank employees were not dormant. They came anyway. You have no right. This is my only home, the woman shouted then. Then Pei looked at her surprised employee. With what? I have a small child. I will soon have a second child, she cried. In the evening, when she told all this to her husband, he offered to move to a rented apartment and this one to sell and close the debt. Well, maybe there would be enough for a small apartment, she agreed with him. But Katie was wrong. They had so much money left that even a third of the apartment would not be enough. So they started living in a rented apartment. Oh, Anthony, I think it started. She clutched her stomach tonight. Now he was calling a cab and an ambulance at the same time to see who could get there fastest. Ah, the wife was already screaming. The cab arrived, but immediately the paramedics arrived. The woman was loaded into the ambulance and taken to the ward. Anthony was worried. He couldn't find a place to be. But when Kathy called and said that now they have not one, but two sons, he was ready to jump to the ceiling. While the woman was in the hospital, Anthony took the weekend off. He stayed home with his oldest son. When they met Katie and celebrated the birth, the man was ready to go on duty again. That day, he went out at night as usual because they paid more for those shifts. He handed out coupons, didn't single out anyone, and didn't memorize anyone. But there was one guy who stood out, wasn't like the others. Anthony noticed him as he was coming out. That respectable man got into the car, started it, but the engine was silent, and the driver was sitting there turning the keys back and forth. "Need a hand?" Anthony came over, as usual. "No, thank you, I'll do it myself," he heard in reply, and walked away, but not far. When the man got out of the car, opened the hood, and began to look at something, Anthony approached again. So still, he looked under the hood too. "Well, if you understand, look, I know you, such clever people, just to beg for a bottle," he muttered to himself under his nose. "I don't drink much at all," Anthony took offense. "All right, look," he turned away. "Everybody try one," the parking lot security guard asked him. How? He didn't understand, because he hadn't done anything. The man got behind the wheel, turned the key, and the car started. "You're a bonus from God," the driver looked out the window. A little bit, Anthony was embarrassed. "Yeah. Thanks again," he waved him off and drove off. The next day, which Anthony didn't expect at all, the stranger in the expensive car came again. "Hello," he said hello to Anthony. "Hello," the man replied politely. "Listen, last night all evening I thought about you. Will you come to work for me?" He looked at him. "Where to?" Anthony did not want to leave the heated place. "I have my own salon. You will look at cars there. If there are any problems, there is a lot of work. I will not offend you with salary," the man asked him. "I don't even know," Anthony began to doubt, but I was not. And by evening he was in a spacious room where there were many beautiful cars. The owner showed and told about them, and Anthony only squinted his eyes from the bright light, which was everywhere. "You will work in the garage. The guys there will show you everything." He showed him the direction. "Okay, thanks. When can we go out?" Anthony was curious. "Tomorrow morning, if you get everything settled at the old place." They shook hands. Anthony quit his job that same evening. The bosses went along with him. For a good and responsible job, they didn't put sticks in his wheels. They let him leave without working. "Katie, you can't imagine where I'll be working now." He came home in the morning. "What?" She was still asleep and put her finger to her lips so he wouldn't wake anyone up. "I've been taken to a car dealership," he whispered loudly to her. "Well, get in there." She spoke with just her lips. "Bye, I love you." He changed his clothes and went to work again. Everything here appealed to the man. He knew a lot of things about cars. He had graduated from college in his profession. I'm Carlos." One of them came up to him. "I'm Anthony," he answered him. "Jacob will be here soon," his colleague told him. They continued working. Everything was interesting, especially Anthony liked foreign cars, which he saw and repaired rarely. "Well, how was work?" The chief often came to the garage. "Everything is fine," Anthony nodded to him. "Customers praise you. They don't want to go to anyone else, only to you." The chief came and clapped him on the shoulder. "That's a good thing," Anthony smiled. "I decided to give you a separate room to work only with VIPs. The pay will be higher there," the chief told him. "What about the boys?" He pointed at them. "Nothing, the guys worked and will work," the chief winked at them. For now, Anthony was stunned that things were happening so fast in his life. He had a perfect garage now. Any man would envy such a thing. He and his boss had a very close relationship. When an important customer came in, they'd call each other back. "Thank you for your work," the boss never tired of praising. "Can I ask you something, even if it seems impudence on my part, but still?" Anthony looked at the chief. "Sure, if I can, I will," he was confident. "Do you have a car? I want to get a job in a cab. I have no money at all." His wife had an apartment. He told me how they got by with Kathy and their 2 kids. Well, I don't know, the man touched his chin. I need to think, after all. A car is not a toy. I promise you that everything will be fine. I'll work here during the day and then I'll go out at night. Anthony was sure of it. What are you, a robot, to work 24 hours a day? The chief was surprised. Why, I'll sleep in the evening, laughed the employee. Okay, I promise to think about it until tomorrow, said the chief. Anthony returned home elated. If he manages to get a car, then everything will be fine with him. What are you glowing? Katie asked him at home. You have no idea. Her husband sat down at the table and started dinner. Tell me, she's already put the kids to bed. No, I won't say anything yet. If it works out tomorrow, we'll talk. He took her hand and pulled her to him. Anthony, she laughed. I'll do anything to make you happy. He kissed her. Such a strong love he had for this woman. I am glad I have found such a worthy man. I have never once doubted you. She laid her hand on his shoulder. They sat like that for a while and went to the bedroom. In the morning, Anthony was afraid to talk to the boss, and if she said no, then he would be very upset. And I'm waiting for you. Met already his chief in the garage door. What? I'm late. He looked at his watch. No, I just couldn't wait to tell you the news. He gave him his hand to shake. What is it? Anthony held his breath. I have a used Lada. If you agree, you can take it. Pointed towards the parking lot. The supervisor pointed. That's the best you could do. He went to inspect the Swallow he had gotten. The car was in decent condition. It didn't even need to be repaired. Anthony knew that from this day forward, his wife and children would always have their bread and butter. Wife, set the table. I'm here with good news. He walked into the house that evening. When Kathy, surprised, did everything and they sat down at the table, her husband began to tell her about what had happened in the last few days. So, have you been in a cab yet? She wondered. Of course, he nodded. I'm going out for my shift tomorrow. Please, just be careful, she asked him as she remembered what her husband had died of. It will be all right. I won't leave you. He ran his hand through her hair. I believe, she smiled softly. Anthony had 2 jobs now. He could afford a lot of things. The first thing they did was buy beds for the kids. Before that, they had slept on the couch with their mom. Anthony had clearly decided that he would save up for an apartment. He didn't want to get into loans. The man realized that it would take more than 1 year, but he was stubborn. At night, he managed to earn good money. There were always customers. This pleased the man. He always came home with the proceeds. Aren't you tired? Katie would ask him at home. No, not at all. I have plenty of time to rest. And he wasn't lying. After work, there was about 6 hours to rest, and coming back from his shift at 5 in the morning, there was plenty of time to lie down too. Well and good, she kissed her husband. Anthony continued to work, toiling in the garage during the day and on the road at night. Everywhere the man was praised, he was glad he could please everyone. You have so much feedback from customers, the dispatchers told him. Good or bad? Anthony didn't know you could leave feedback. Of course good, you're a saint. The girls laughed at him. Oh, thank you. He told them the same thing. Kathy was glad her husband was in demand. She did everything she could to support him. She never denied him intimacy. She cooked, ironed, even though it was often unnecessary. That evening, Anthony went to work as usual. He put on his favorite overalls, in which it was comfortable and convenient, went to the kitchen where he ate before heading out into the night streets of the city. Are you going to bed? He asked his wife as she walked from the kitchen. No. Why did you want to talk? She stopped. Just sit with me. He patted the stool. Okay, she sat down. How about I take the day off and we go to the park with the kids? He touched his lips to her cheek. Could we do that? She laughed, for her husband had already worked many hours without a day off. Of course, I don't think anyone will mind. It's my initiative. He kissed her again. But I don't think anyone will mind. It was her turn to kiss him. He pulled himself together and left the apartment. The car was parked in the yard. He looked outside, opened the door, and got behind the wheel. Anthony looked out the window, informed the dispatcher that he was out for his shift, and rolled off. Anthony, are you free? It came over the radio. Yes, and ready to take whoever you want anywhere in the world, he laughed. Not up to laughing, she told him the address. This is an elite village? He was surprised. So what? The dispatcher couldn't argue with him. She rushed him. They never called cars like mine? Still, he could not believe that the girl was not joking with him. But now they did. she was already yelling. "But I'm not in business class," he insisted. "You came out to argue or work. There's no one on the line but you, and it's an emergency. She's pregnant." The dispatcher was hysterical. "Okay, I'm on my way." He pressed the gas pedal. The drive was decent for the distance. Anthony smirked. What if she was really playing a joke on him? Now he'd get there, waste so much gasoline, and they just wouldn't let him in. Thoughts skipped around, one bothering him, then the other. Finally, in the distance, he saw streetlights. "I'm there," he said to himself under his breath, and drove up to a booth with a guard. "Who are you here to see?" He came out. "I don't know, they called a cab to this house," he said. Now he said something into the radio, then nodded. The barrier went up. Anthony drove through. He realized that he had indeed been called. "Hello," he saw the woman. She was writhing and couldn't get into the car properly. "Why didn't you call an ambulance?" He was surprised. "What?" She looked at him for a moment. It didn't even occur to her. "Get in quickly," he helped her. He started the car. They drove off. The driver could have increased the speed, but he was afraid he might make it worse for the passenger. So he drove slowly, but not so slow that they'd be late for anything. "Could you go any faster?" she asked him from the back seat. "Would it bother you?" He was afraid. What could it hurt? It was like she was squeezing the words out of her mouth. "I don't know," Anthony began nervously. He realized the woman was already in the state they were in the prenatal ward. "Goni," she was screaming. "Come on, I'll call an ambulance." He looked at her in the rearview mirror. "Call whoever you want." She couldn't stand it. "Does it hurt?" Anthony wasn't worried about speed anymore. They were chasing. "Ah," she yelled. "Jesus," he stopped the car, got out, exhaled. "What are you doing?" "Ah." He stopped. He could hear her breathing and screaming. "Hello, ambulance?" he asked into the phone. When he was answered in the affirmative, he named the kilometer of the road they were on and called the crew there. "Honey, wait." He wanted to help her, but he didn't know how. There was no one on the highway at that moment. "Ah." She wasn't saying anything anymore, just screaming. Anthony pushed the front seat all the way back so there was room. Then went to the trunk. There was a canister of water. There were rags, but all dirty. I had to put my jacket underneath. "Ah, here it comes," shouted the woman. "Ah," came Anthony. He put his hands up to her, not knowing what to do. Ahead showed. He realized that nothing could be stopped now. "Come on," he shouted. "Ah." She made one last push. "Well done." He watched, and there was a little boy lying in his jacket. The passenger leaned back in her seat. She had no strength at all. A siren sounded in the distance. It meant an ambulance was approaching. "You're so good." The paramedic took the baby out of the man's arms. Yeah, he was exhausted, not only physically, but most of all mentally. "So we take the mother too." "Thank you," whispered the woman in the blue suit. Anthony got behind the wheel. He realized that today he would not go anywhere. Tomorrow he would have to give the car back to him to have it completely cleaned. He looked back at the back seat. He almost threw up. "Katie, I'm home." He walked to the kitchen. "What are your hands in?" She pointed at them. "If I tell you, you'll never believe it." He looked at her tiredly. "Tell me." She tensed again. And her husband told her everything, showed her every last move. "You're my hero." She went over and hugged him. "What are you talking about?" If she had gone into labor anywhere else, everyone would have helped. He was sure of it. I don't think a lot of people would just be confused. She was sure of what she was saying too. "Okay, go wash up and let's go to bed," she told him. Okay, her husband agreed with her. He didn't feel like doing anything today. But until the morning, he did not sleep a wink, because as soon as he closed them, he saw the hint that came out of the woman. In the morning, Anthony first called the car wash, said he would be there in half an hour. They were waiting for him. After that, he called his boss, said he had no time today. He didn't mind. Today, Anthony did nothing but take care of the car and his family. He didn't show up for work until the next day. "Why weren't you there yesterday?" the other workers asked. "No, I can't bear to tell it again." At that moment, the supervisor came through the door. "Why?" He looked at him. "Hello," startled Anthony. He thought that the man already knew and was about to scold him about the car. "So what happened?" The chief leaned on the door jamb. "I went out at 9 on my route, and there was a call," and he repeated it all again. So the chief went after him. Anthony thought he was going to start telling him that he'd dirty up his car, and now it was impossible to drive there. I had it dry cleaned. He started to justify himself. What are you talking about? So you're the cabbie who delivered my wife's baby? Billy hugged him. What? Anthony stared at him. He couldn't understand what his boss had just told him. My wife couldn't call anyone last night. That's where you came in, he exulted. Why weren't you at home? The man couldn't get up to speed. It's nobody's business anymore. He led Anthony to the administration building. As he walked, he couldn't believe that this was really happening. He thought such coincidences only happened in movies or something. And I was a fool, thinking whether to give you the car or not. And imagine if I hadn't, she would have had to give birth at home alone, he thought, then shook his head, as if dismissing these thoughts. I never would have thought it. Anthony was shocked. So what do you want? The supervisor looked at the man. Come on, nothing. I did it as a human being, not for something I would get. He began to excuse himself. Anthony, it was fate that you and I met, and that's how it worked out. Billy stood up and began to walk around the office. Believe me, I don't need anything. Can I stay working for you? And don't take the car away from me yet, he asked. That's it. Go on. Keep working. Billy showed him to the door. After the employee left, he made a couple calls, and after that he sat down in a chair and calmed down. Elizabeth, hi, you have no idea what I'm about to tell you. He dialed his wife's number. He started to tell her that he found out who did it and what he wanted to thank him for. You're right about everything. Do what you think is right. His wife always supported him in everything. Then Billy did what he wanted to do. It took a couple days to get the paperwork done. He spent all that time with his wife in the hospital. The baby was born healthy, and the mother was fine. When Billy got the call that everything was ready, he personally went to visit Anthony. Hello, KB opened the door for him. Greetings, my name is Billy. I'm your husband's boss. May I pass? He asked the hostess. Of course she couldn't say anything more. Anthony himself came out of the room with a baby in his arms. What are you doing here? He still felt uneasy when he saw the chief. Anthony, you don't have to do anything. I'll do everything myself, stopped him Billy as he wanted to bring him a chair. Okay, stopped the man. He and his wife stood silent, just looking at the guest. Okay, I'll start with the main thing. Billy pulled some papers out of a folder. These are the papers for your apartment, which is in the center of town. Come on, Anthony started to say, but Kathy gave him a look that shut him up. You can tell she's a smart woman. Billy looked at her. Thank you, she pursed her lips. This may be the main thing for Billy, but I have a second item. He pulled out a second stack of paper. What else? The man couldn't understand. It's your own taxicab, which was established a few days ago. Of course, there are hardly any cars there yet, but I think you'll get employees. Billy came over and shook his hand once again. Jesus, what's the big deal? Believe me, anyone would have delivered your wife's baby, Anthony told him. You're not anyone. The man signaled him to shut up. There's more paperwork, so it's not over. Katie looked at the folder. What a savvy wife you have, Anthony smiled the supervisor. Yeah, what is? Anthony was a little embarrassed for Kathy right now. As you guessed, I have another clause. The car I gave you for rent stays with you. You can work on it if you want. But I'd like to give you the car for your own use. He handed over the papers. That's it. I've had enough of these handouts. Anthony freaked out. Let me give it to you. Katie held out her hand. Okay, Billy realized that on the one hand, this whole thing wasn't very pleasant. Anthony, I haven't said the most important thing. Please come out here. Billy called out to him. What else? He could not come out. In a month we will be baptizing our son, and you will be his godfather. He came over and hugged him. That would be enough for me. Anthony looked at his boss, now probably ex-boss. Okay, that's enough. If I can afford it and you can't, why not help? He clapped his future cousin on the shoulder. Is that it? Looked Anthony at him. Yes, nodded and smiled at Billy. Thank you. Now it was Anthony's turn to thank. That's it. You and I are going to be inbreeding soon, so there's no need to sit in ambush. As soon as Elizabeth is discharged, we're expecting you for porridge, he told Anthony. Good. He looked at Katie. Billy left, and the family stood like that in the hallway, all the papers on the nightstand. You've said I wouldn't need anything with you. Katie walked up to him. Yes, he nodded. Well, your wish has come true. Now we have everything and more. She couldn't believe it herself. Does that happen? He looked at his wife. Probably, if it's all happening in real life. She knitted the papers in her hands. 2 weeks passed after that day. Billy, as promised, invited them to his house. introduced him to Elizabeth, who smiled at Anthony and once even apologized. No kidding, he wasn't very pleased to hear her apologize. If it wasn't for you then, she would have started that song again. You should all calm down by now. Anthony looked at his future godson. Would you like to hold him? Elizabeth handed him into his arms. Thank you, I have more friends now, Anthony said. And family, Billy came up to them. Well, that too, grinned the man. Some time ago, he was a simple loader in a hospital and never would have thought that he would become the owner of such wealth. Hello, and can I take a statement? He came to the hospital once. He had to open a business, and for this he needed to register. Anthony, they say that you are now the owner of factories and steamships, and all thanks to what? The fact that he worked in the hospital for so many years. Looked at him, girls and women of this department. Who's talking? He didn't understand. The whole city is shocked that such a thing could happen, at least the neighborhood where you live, and our hospital, all on the ears, told the latest gossip local chief. Oh yes, you say too. He took the paper that had already been prepared for him and wanted to go out. Will you be a godfather? The same woman asked lastly. I will, he nodded and went out. As he walked home, he thought that he didn't give a damn about anyone. He lives once, and if he is so lucky, why not use everything? And let them say what they want. He hadn't stolen anything. Are you ready? His wife asked him on the day of Harry's baptism. Of course, he stood in the hallway. Then take the children and go into the yard, she asked him. Okay, went with them Anthony down the stairs. They got in the car, drove to the church where a lot of people had already gathered. Hi, Billy walked up to them. Hello, Anthony couldn't get used to that. Shall we go? He handed his son to his godfather. Sure, Anthony looked at his children. They entered the church, it was quiet. Everything went well. Harry didn't even cry once. They came out, crossed themselves. Thanks for your son. Billy shook his hand for the umpteenth time. Thank you for everything, they hugged. Elizabeth walked over to Kathy. What a wonderful husband you have, she told her. I know it myself, he saved me once, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. Happiness to you. Elizabeth spoke sincerely. And the same to you, the women hugged each other. Together they drove to Billy's house to continue the ceremony.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.